He was a renowned businessman, but none of his achievements had prepared him for his baby's incessant crying. The stepmother, with sweetness and control, offered bottles that seemed to soothe, until the day of the revelation. An 8-year-old girl appeared with evidence that the care hid poison. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The rain fell endlessly over Seattle, its gentle patter against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the modern lakeside mansion, creating a rhythmic backdrop that should have been soothing. But nothing was soothing in Blake Harrison's world these days. Not the pristine view of Lake Washington, not the $40 million smart home that responded to his every command, and certainly not the piercing wails that echoed through the otherwise immaculate house at 3 in the morning. "I've tried everything, Blake. Everything." Meredith, his wife of 8 months, appeared in the doorway of his home office, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. In her arms, she cradled 6-month-old Ethan, whose face was contorted in pain, tiny fists balled tight as he screamed. "He just won't stop." Blake rubbed his temples, the familiar headache building behind his eyes. As the founder and CEO of Quantum Innovations, one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech companies specializing in artificial intelligence, he was used to solving impossible problems. He had built a fortune by finding solutions where others saw only roadblocks. Yet here, in his own home, he felt utterly powerless. "Did you try the gas drops again?" he asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Of course I did," Meredith replied, a hint of irritation in her tone. She bounced Ethan gently, her movements practiced and deliberate. "I've given him the drops, I've tried the bicycle legs thing, I've even used that ridiculous vibrating cushion your mother sent. Nothing works." Blake stood up from behind his desk, crossing the room to his wife and son. Ethan's screams intensified as Blake approached, his little face red with exertion. This had been their reality for nearly 3 months now. Endless days of crying, sleepless nights, and a growing tension that threatened to break them. "Here, let me try," Blake said, reaching for his son. Meredith hesitated momentarily before handing over the baby. "He just had a bottle about 20 minutes ago. I made it myself, just the way Dr. Collins prescribed." Blake nodded, taking Ethan into his arms. The boy's cries didn't subside. If anything, they grew more desperate. Blake felt that familiar pang of inadequacy wash over him. Before Sarah had left, before she'd decided that a war correspondent position in the Middle East was more important than being a mother, he had imagined fatherhood differently. He had pictured weekend hikes with a baby carrier, quiet evenings reading bedtime stories, building the kind of bond he'd never had with his own father. Instead, he had this, a screaming child who seemed to be in constant pain, a new wife trying desperately to fill the role of mother to a child not biologically hers, and the crushing weight of knowing that no amount of money or business acumen could fix whatever was wrong with his son. "I'll walk with him for a while," Blake said, pacing the length of his office with Ethan against his shoulder. "You should try to get some sleep." Meredith's face softened, the lines of exhaustion momentarily easing. "Are you sure? You have that board meeting in the morning." "I'm sure. I'll manage." She crossed the room, placing a gentle kiss on his cheek before running a manicured finger over Ethan's damp hair. "I'll make him another bottle in a couple of hours. Sometimes it helps if I make them fresh each time." As Meredith left the room, Blake continued his slow circuit around the office, gently patting Ethan's back as the boy wailed against his shoulder. Through the windows, he could see the lights of downtown Seattle glittering in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt enveloping his home life. Blake had met Meredith just 2 months after Sarah had left. It had been a whirlwind romance, the kind he'd never expected to have at 42, especially not with a child to raise alone. Meredith had seemed like an answered prayer, beautiful, caring, and inexplicably drawn to both him and Ethan. She'd stepped into their lives with a confidence that had swept Blake off his feet, assuring him that her experience as a pediatric nurse had prepared her for the challenges of instant motherhood. They'd married quickly, perhaps too quickly in retrospect. But Blake had been drowning in the responsibilities of single fatherhood while trying to run a billion-dollar company, and Meredith had offered a lifeline he couldn't refuse. "It's okay, buddy," Blake whispered to his son, his voice breaking slightly. "We'll figure this out." But the words felt hollow even to his own ears. They had consulted with 4 different pediatricians, tried 6 different formulas, eliminated potential allergens from Meredith's diet when she had been breastfeeding Ethan alongside formula, and even explored alternative therapies that Blake's rational mind had initially rejected. Nothing helped. The colic, if that's what it was, persisted, and Blake watched helplessly as his son suffered. By 5 in the morning, Blake had managed to rock Ethan into a fitful sleep. He placed the baby carefully in the custom-designed crib in the nursery, holding his breath as Ethan stirred slightly before settling again. The nursery, like the rest of the house, was a testament to Blake's success. A room filled with the best of everything money could buy, from the organic cotton bedding to the air purification system that maintained optimal conditions for a baby's lungs. Blake stood over the crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of Ethan's chest, finally peaceful in sleep. The circles under the baby's eyes mirrored his own, Blake knew. Father and son, united in exhaustion. He made his way back to the master bedroom, where Meredith lay curled on her side of the king-sized bed. Her breathing was deep and even, her face serene in sleep. Blake envied her ability to find rest amidst the chaos of their lives. Somehow she managed to maintain her composure, to function despite the strain. Sliding under the covers, Blake knew sleep would elude him. In 2 hours, he would need to shower, dress, and transform back into the confident CEO his employees and board members expected. He would need to make decisions that affected thousands of people, to present a vision for the future of quantum innovations, all while operating on what amounted to perhaps 10 hours of sleep over the past 5 days. As he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts drifted to the gardens that surrounded the property. He had hired Rosa Mendez and her landscaping team 6 months ago, after purchasing the lakeside estate. Rosa, a single mother with an 8-year-old daughter named Lily, had impressed him with her knowledge of native plants and sustainable gardening practices. Now the grounds were a lush testament to her skills, with carefully cultivated gardens that required minimal water and provided habitats for local wildlife. Blake had noticed Lily occasionally, a quiet girl with intelligent eyes, who sometimes accompanied her mother on weekend jobs. Once he had found her sitting cross-legged near the koi pond, sketching the fish with remarkable detail for a child her age. He had complimented her work, and she had smiled shyly before returning to her drawing. There was something about Lily that reminded Blake of himself as a child, observant, somewhat solitary, finding joy in the details others might miss. In another life, perhaps Ethan would have been like that too, curious and content. Instead, his son seemed trapped in a cycle of pain that none of their considerable resources could alleviate. The first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the automated blinds when Blake heard Ethan's cries resume. Beside him, Meredith stirred, then sat up quickly. "I'll get him," she said, her voice surprisingly alert. "You need to at least try to rest before your meeting." Before Blake could protest, she was out of bed, wrapping her silk robe around her slender frame as she headed for the nursery. Blake listened as her footsteps receded down the hallway, followed by the sound of Ethan's cries momentarily intensifying as the nursery door opened. Then, strangely, silence. Blake sat up, straining to hear. Meredith was remarkably good at soothing Ethan, especially during his feeding times. She had insisted from the beginning on preparing all of his bottles herself, explaining that her experience as a nurse had taught her the importance of precise measurements and temperature control. Blake had been grateful for her expertise, relieved to have someone who seemed to know what they were doing, when he felt so out of his depth. He lay back down, closing his eyes as a wave of gratitude washed over him. Whatever Meredith's flaws, her occasional moodiness, her sometimes controlling nature, she had stepped into their lives when they had needed her most. She had brought a semblance of order to the chaos that had followed Sarah's departure. For that alone, Blake would be forever thankful. As he drifted into a light sleep, Blake couldn't have known that in just a few hours, his perception of his perfect wife would be shattered forever. He couldn't have imagined that the true source of his son's suffering was much closer and much more deliberate than he had ever feared. And he certainly couldn't have predicted that salvation would come in the form of an observant 8-year-old girl, whose courage would ultimately save not just Ethan, but Blake himself from a deception so profound it would shake the very foundation of the life he had built. Lily Mendez loved the Harrison mansion. While other kids her age spent Saturday mornings watching cartoons or playing video games, she preferred to accompany her mother to work, wandering the sprawling grounds with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. At 8 years old, Lily had already developed a keen eye for detail and an uncanny ability to blend into the background. skills that made her both an excellent artist and an unwitting witness to the private moments of the wealthy family who owned the estate. "Remember to stay away from the main house," Rosa reminded her daughter as they arrived that morning. "Mr. Harrison has an important meeting today, and Mrs. Harrison mentioned the baby isn't feeling well again." Lily nodded solemnly. She had heard the baby crying many times during their visits. Sometimes the sounds carried all the way to the Japanese garden, where she liked to sit and draw the koi fish. The cries always made her feel sad, reminding her of the stray kitten she had once found mewling in pain behind their apartment building. That kitten hadn't survived, despite her mother's best efforts to nurse it back to health. "I'll just be in the greenhouse area," Lily promised, already heading toward her favorite spot. The Seattle morning was unusually bright, with sunlight filtering through the dissipating fog that hung over Lake Washington. Lily made her way along the stone path that wound through the property, her worn sneakers silent on the smooth surface. The greenhouse stood at the far edge of the formal gardens, a gleaming structure of glass and steel that housed Mrs. Harrison's collection of exotic orchids. Lily wasn't supposed to go inside, but she loved to peer through the windows, sketching the strange and beautiful flowers. As she approached the greenhouse, Lily noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar and she could hear movement inside. Curious, she crept closer, staying low beneath the windowsill. From her position, she could just see through the gap in the door. Mrs. Harrison was inside, her back to the entrance. She was standing at the potting bench, but she wasn't working with the flowers. Lily watched as Mrs. Harrison removed a small, dark bottle from a locked cabinet beneath the bench. The bottle had a warning symbol on it, a skull and crossbones that Lily recognized from her science class discussions about household poisons. Mrs. Harrison glanced over her shoulder nervously before carefully unscrewing the cap and using an eyedropper to extract a small amount of liquid. Lily's heart began to race as Mrs. Harrison then took a baby bottle from her designer handbag, the same kind she had seen being used to feed the Harrison baby. With practiced precision, Mrs. Harrison added several drops of the liquid to the bottle, swirled it gently, and then returned the dark bottle to its hiding place in the cabinet, locking it securely. Instinctively, Lily ducked lower as Mrs. Harrison turned toward the door. She held her breath, pressing herself against the exterior wall of the greenhouse as Mrs. Harrison emerged, baby bottle now tucked back into her handbag. Lily remained frozen until the sound of Mrs. Harrison's footsteps faded, then slowly peered around the corner to watch her walk purposefully back toward the main house. Lily's mind was racing. In school, they had learned about dangerous chemicals and how they should never be added to food or drinks. The skull and crossbones on the bottle was a universal warning sign, and Mrs. Harrison had been so secretive, looking around as if making sure no one was watching. Something was very wrong. With a determination that belied her age, Lily made a decision. She needed to see what was in that bottle. She waited a few more minutes to make sure Mrs. Harrison wouldn't return, then slipped inside the greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, heavy with the scent of orchids and rich soil. Lily moved carefully to avoid knocking anything over, making her way to the potting bench. The cabinet was locked, but Lily had spent enough time watching her mother repair things to know that some locks were just for show. She found a thin metal plant marker on the bench and, with a technique she'd observed when her mother had to open their stuck mailbox, managed to wiggle it into the simple lock. After a minute of careful maneuvering, she heard a satisfying click. Inside the cabinet were several gardening chemicals, fertilizers, fungicides, and pest control products. But separate from these, in a small wooden box, was the dark bottle Mrs. Harrison had used. Lily carefully lifted it out, her hands trembling slightly as she read the label. Laboratory-grade stimulant. Warning: not for consumption. Keep away from children. Causes severe gastric distress and neurological irritation. Lily didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. This was something that would make someone very sick, especially a baby. With shaking hands, she replaced the bottle exactly as she had found it, closed the cabinet and relocked it. Then she ran. Her first instinct was to find her mother, but Rosa was working on the other side of the property, pruning the hedge maze with the rest of the landscaping team. The main house was closer, and Lily knew Mr. Harrison would be there preparing for his meeting. Without stopping to think about the consequences of bursting into the house uninvited, Lily ran as fast as her legs would carry her. At the service entrance, she hesitated only briefly before pushing through the door that led to the kitchen. The Harrisons' housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, looked up in surprise from where she was preparing a tray of refreshments. "Lily, what are you doing in here? You know you're supposed to stay outside with your mother." "I need to see Mr. Harrison," Lily gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "It's really important. It's about the baby." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Mr. Harrison is very busy this morning. What's wrong?" "I can't tell you. I have to tell him." Lily's voice rose with urgency. "Please, Mrs. Chen. It's really important." Something in the girl's tone must have convinced the housekeeper, because after a moment's hesitation she nodded. "He's in his office. Come with me." Mrs. Chen led Lily through the immaculate house, past rooms filled with modern furniture and priceless art. They stopped outside a heavy wooden door, where Mrs. Chen knocked softly. "Mr. Harrison? I'm sorry to disturb you, but Rosa's daughter Lily is here. She says she needs to speak with you urgently about Ethan." There was a pause, then the sound of a chair moving. The door opened to reveal Blake Harrison, dressed in a tailored suit, but with exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Lily?" His gaze moved from the girl to Mrs. Chen, confusion clear on his face. "I'm sorry, sir." She was very insistent. "It's okay, Mrs. Chen." Blake stepped aside, gesturing for Lily to enter the office. "What's this about Ethan?" As Mrs. Chen retreated, closing the door behind her, Lily stood in the center of the vast office, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was about to say. Mr. Harrison moved to a chair, lowering himself to be at her eye level. "Lily, what's wrong?" "You can tell me." "I saw Mrs. Harrison," Lily began, her voice small but steady. "In the greenhouse. She was putting something in the baby's bottle. Something bad." Blake's expression didn't change, but Lily noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of the chair. "What do you mean, something bad?" "It was a dark bottle with a skull and crossbones on it. She took it from a locked cabinet and put drops in the baby bottle. The bottle says it causes—" Lily struggled to remember the exact words— "gastric distress and neurological irritation, and it says to keep away from children." For a long moment, Blake just stared at her, his face unreadable. Lily shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, afraid he wouldn't believe her. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Lily?" His voice was very quiet. Lily nodded emphatically. "Yes, sir. I saw her do it. She looked around first to make sure nobody was watching, and she locked the bottle back up after. It's in a wooden box in the cabinet under the potting bench." Blake rose slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the front of the property. Lily could see his reflection in the glass. His jaw was tight, his eyes focused on something far away. "Mr. Harrison," Lily ventured after the silence had stretched too long, "are you going to check the bottle? I can show you where it is." Blake turned back to her, and Lily was surprised to see that his eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Yes, Lily, we're going to check. But first, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw from the beginning." As Lily recounted the details of what she had witnessed, Blake listened with an intensity that made her feel both important and frightened. She described the bottle, the warning label, the careful way Mrs. Harrison had measured the drops, and how she had looked around furtively before and after. When she finished, Blake went to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Mrs. Chen, could you come in here, please?" The housekeeper appeared moments later, looking concerned. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to call Rosa and ask her to come to the house right away. Tell her it's about Lily, but that everything is fine. I just need to speak with her." As Mrs. Chen left to make the call, Blake knelt in front of Lily again. "I'm going to need your help, Lily. What you've told me is very serious, and if it's true—" His voice caught slightly. "You may have saved Ethan from something terrible, but I need to be absolutely certain. Are you willing to help me find out the truth?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." "Good girl." Blake managed a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Now we need to be very careful. Mrs. Harrison can't know what you've told me, at least not yet. When your mother gets here, I'm going to ask her permission for you to show me where you saw the bottle. In the meantime, I want you to stay right here with me. Is that okay?" "Yes, sir." Lily glanced around the office, taking in the wall of books, the sophisticated computer setup, and the large windows overlooking the lake. "Can I draw while we wait?" Blake's smile warmed slightly. "Of course. There's paper in the drawer there, and I'm sure I can find you some pencils." As Lily settled at a corner of Blake's desk with paper and a set of colored pencils, she couldn't help but notice how often he glanced toward the door, as if expecting or dreading someone's arrival. She also noticed when he picked up his phone and sent a text message, his fingers moving rapidly over the screen. Outside, the sun had fully emerged from behind the morning clouds, casting bright light across the lake. It promised to be a beautiful day in Seattle. But inside the Harrison mansion, a shadow had fallen that no amount of sunshine could dispel. And Lily, with her innocent observation and courage to speak up, had just set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Rosa Mendez arrived at the main house 15 minutes later, her weathered hands still bearing traces of soil from the morning's work. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by worried eyes as Mrs. Chen led her to Blake's office. "Mr. Harrison, is everything okay with Lily?" Rosa asked as she entered, immediately spotting her daughter seated contentedly at the corner of the massive desk, drawing. Blake rose from his chair, his expression grave. "Mrs. Mendez, thank you for coming so quickly. Lily is fine, more than fine, actually. She may have done something incredibly important today." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down. There's something we need to discuss." Rosa sat hesitantly, glancing between her daughter and her employer. "What's going on?" "Lily observed something this morning that concerns me greatly," Blake began, choosing his words carefully. "She saw Mrs. Harrison in the greenhouse, adding an unknown substance from a labeled bottle to Ethan's formula. The label, according to Lily, had warnings about causing severe gastric distress and neurological irritation." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. "Dios mío," she whispered. "Are you sure?" "That's what I need to confirm," Blake said. "I'd like your permission to have Lily show me exactly where she saw this bottle. I need to see it for myself." Rosa reached for her daughter's hand. "Lily, is this true? Did you really see Mrs. Harrison do this?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mama, I wasn't spying, I promise. I was just going to draw the flowers, and she was there in the greenhouse." Rosa turned back to Blake, her expression resolute. "Of course she can show you, if there's any chance this is happening." She didn't finish the sentence, but the horror in her eyes said everything. "Thank you." Blake moved to a cabinet in the corner of his office and removed a small device. "This is a camera. I want to document whatever we find in case—" He broke off, unable to complete the thought. The three made their way across the grounds, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen from the main house. Blake had texted Mrs. Chen to keep track of Meredith's whereabouts. She had reported that Mrs. Harrison was upstairs with the baby, who had finally fallen asleep after his bottle. At the greenhouse, Lily pointed to the potting bench. "The cabinet underneath. She has a key, but I used a plant marker to open it." Blake produced a small tool from his pocket. "I have something better than a plant marker," he said, managing a small smile for Lily's benefit. Within seconds, he had the cabinet open. Inside, just as Lily had described, was a wooden box. Blake carefully lifted it out and opened it. The dark bottle sat nestled in velvet, its warning label clearly visible. He photographed it from several angles before carefully removing it. "Do not open it," Rosa warned. "Whatever it is, it could be dangerous to touch." Blake nodded, placing the bottle in a plastic bag he had brought from the house. "I'm going to have this analyzed immediately." His voice was steady, but Rosa could see the tremor in his hands. "What I don't understand is why. Why would she do this?" "Mr. Harrison," Rosa said gently, "whatever the reason, what matters now is protecting your son. If Mrs. Harrison is indeed putting this in his formula, then she's been deliberately making him sick for months," Blake finished, his voice hollow. "All those nights of screaming, all those doctor's appointments, all those tests. It was her all along." The realization seemed to hit him physically, and he leaned against the potting bench for support. Rosa moved to his side, her maternal instinct extending to this powerful man who suddenly looked as vulnerable as a child. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. Blake straightened, a new resolve hardening his features. "First, I'm going to ensure Ethan is safe. Then I'm going to find out exactly what this substance is and what it does, and then," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I'm going to confront my wife." Back at the main house, Blake thanked Rosa and Lily, asking them to say nothing about what they had discovered. "Not to anyone," he emphasized, "especially not to Mrs. Harrison. This is potentially very dangerous, and I need time to handle it properly." "Of course," Rosa agreed. "But please, Mr. Harrison, be careful, and let us know if there's anything else we can do to help." After they left, Blake sat alone in his office, the bagged bottle on his desk like a malevolent presence. He cancelled his board meeting, citing a family emergency, Then he made 2 calls, one to Dr. James Anderson, Ethan's pediatrician and Blake's longtime friend, and another to a private laboratory in downtown Seattle that specialized in chemical analysis. By noon, Blake had delivered the bottle to the lab, which promised results within hours, given the potential danger to an infant. He then returned home to find Meredith in the kitchen, preparing lunch. "Blake, I thought you had your board meeting today." She looked up from the salad she was making, surprise evident in her perfect features. "I postponed it," Blake replied, studying his wife's face for any sign of guilt or deception. "How's Ethan?" "Finally sleeping peacefully," Meredith said, her smile warm. "I think the new formula might be helping. He took a full bottle this morning and hasn't fussed since." Blake nodded, forcing himself to return her smile. "That's great news. I think I'll go check on him." "Let him sleep," Meredith said quickly, placing a hand on Blake's arm. "You know how hard it is to get him down when he's having one of his episodes." Blake gently removed her hand. "I'll be quiet. I just want to see him." In the nursery, Blake stood over his son's crib, watching the steady rise and fall of his tiny chest. Ethan's face was relaxed in sleep, showing no signs of the distress that had become his normal state. Blake reached down to stroke his son's cheek, his heart constricting at the thought of what might have been happening. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you better." Blake spent the afternoon in a state of hypervigilance, watching Meredith's every move while pretending nothing was amiss. When she mentioned preparing Ethan's evening bottle, Blake casually offered to do it himself. "You've been handling everything for so long," he said. "Let me take some of the load off." A shadow passed over Meredith's face. "That's sweet, but you know how particular I am about his formula. The temperature has to be exactly right, and the measurements— I think I can manage to follow directions on a can of formula," Blake interrupted with a forced chuckle. "Besides, I've watched you do it 100 times. Meredith's smile tightened. "Of course. I just meant that since I've found a routine that seems to be working, maybe we shouldn't change it." "One bottle won't hurt," Blake insisted. "Why don't you take a break? You've been amazing with him all day." After a moment's hesitation, Meredith relented. "You're right. A long bath sounds heavenly right now." She kissed Blake's cheek. "Let me know if you need help, though." Once Meredith had disappeared upstairs, Blake prepared Ethan's bottle exactly according to the instructions on the formula can. No additions, no special techniques, just clean water and powder in the correct ratio, warmed to body temperature. When Ethan woke an hour later, Blake was waiting. He lifted his son from the crib, cradling him close as he offered the bottle. Ethan accepted it eagerly, drinking steadily with none of the fussing or pulling away that had become routine during feedings. Blake watched in stunned silence as his son emptied the bottle and then lay contentedly in his arms, blue eyes blinking sleepily up at him. No crying, no arching back in pain, no clenched fists or drawn-up legs, just a normal, satisfied baby. The contrast was so stark that Blake felt tears stinging his eyes. How long had his son been suffering needlessly? How many nights of agony could have been prevented if he had simply prepared the bottles himself? His phone vibrated in his pocket. Shifting Ethan carefully to one arm, Blake checked the message. It was from the lab. "Analysis complete. Results urgent. Please call immediately." Blake placed Ethan back in his crib, now sleeping peacefully, and stepped into the hallway to make the call. "Mr. Harrison," the lab technician's voice was serious, "the substance you brought us is a synthetic stimulant typically used in laboratory settings to induce stress responses in test animals. It causes severe gastrointestinal spasms, irritability, and neurological distress. It is absolutely contraindicated for human consumption, especially for infants whose systems are still developing." Blake closed his eyes, leaning against the wall for support. What kind of damage could it cause long-term? With prolonged exposure, potentially significant. Digestive issues, sleep disorders, even neurological development could be affected. "How long has this been going on?" "Months," Blake whispered. "At least 3 months." There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Harrison, have you contacted the authorities? This is a clear case of—" "I'm handling it," Blake interrupted. "I needed confirmation first." "Thank you for your help." As he ended the call, Blake heard the sound of water draining upstairs. Meredith would be finished with her bath soon. He needed to decide his next steps carefully. His second call was to Dr. Anderson. "James, I need you to come to the house. It's about Ethan. I've discovered something. I can't even say it out loud. Just please come as soon as you can, Doctor." Anderson, hearing the distress in his friend's voice, promised to be there within the hour. Blake returned to the nursery, pulling a chair close to Ethan's crib. He would not leave his son alone again, not until he was certain of his safety. As he sat in the dim room watching over the peacefully sleeping child, Blake's mind raced through the months since Meredith had entered their lives. How convenient it had been that she had pediatric nursing experience. How insistent she had been on preparing all of Ethan's bottles herself. How she had subtly discouraged Blake from taking too active a role in feeding his son, citing her expertise and Ethan's apparent preference for her technique. And yet there had been those small moments of inconsistency that he had dismissed. The times when Ethan seemed to improve briefly during Meredith's rare absences, the way his son sometimes recoiled from bottles she prepared, but accepted those made by the occasional night nurse without issue. The inexplicable worsening of symptoms, despite changing formulas and eliminating potential allergens. All the signs had been there, but Blake had been too exhausted, too desperate for help, too willing to believe in the perfect wife who had seemed to appear just when he needed her most. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jerked Blake from his thoughts. He tensed as the nursery door opened, revealing Meredith in her silk robe, her hair damp from the bath. "Is he still sleeping?" she whispered, moving toward the crib. Blake stood, positioning himself between his wife and his son. "Yes, peacefully for once." Meredith smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful. See, I told you the new formula might help." "It wasn't the formula," Blake said quietly. "It was the lack of additives." Meredith's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I made his bottle myself. Just formula and water, nothing else." Blake held her gaze steadily. "No special ingredients from the greenhouse." The color drained from Meredith's face, but she recovered quickly. "The greenhouse? Blake, what are you talking about?" "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Meredith." Blake's voice remained calm, though his heart was pounding. "The question is, why? Why would you deliberately make our son sick?" For a moment, Meredith stood frozen, her eyes darting between Blake and the sleeping baby. Then her expression crumpled into one of wounded innocence. "Blake, you're scaring me. I don't understand what you're saying." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Is this because you're tired? We're both exhausted, I know, but to accuse me of—" "Stop!" Blake's voice was steel. "Just stop. I know about the bottle in the greenhouse. I know what you've been adding to Ethan's formula. What I don't know is why my wife would systematically poison my son." Meredith's facade cracked, then reformed like ice over troubled waters. She took a step back, arms crossing defensively over her chest. "Blake, you're not thinking clearly. What bottle? What are you talking about?" Her voice was controlled, but Blake could hear the undercurrent of panic. "I would never hurt Ethan. Never." "Then explain the laboratory-grade stimulant hidden in the greenhouse," Blake said, his voice low to avoid waking his son. "Explain why our gardener's daughter saw you adding it to Ethan's bottle this morning. Explain why, when I prepared his formula myself without any additions, he drank it without pain and is now sleeping peacefully for the first time in months." Meredith's eyes darted to the window, then back to Blake. Her breathing had quickened, but she maintained her composure with visible effort. "That little girl is lying," she said finally. "I don't know why, but she's making this up. There's no bottle, no stimulant. I've been trying everything to help Ethan, not hurt him. I've seen the bottle, Meredith. I've had the contents analyzed." Blake pulled out his phone, showing her the photos he had taken in the greenhouse. "This isn't something a child could invent. The lab confirmed it's a synthetic stimulant used to induce gastric distress in laboratory animals. It's been making Ethan sick, deliberately sick, for months." For a moment, Meredith said nothing, her eyes fixed on the images on Blake's phone. Then, suddenly, her expression changed. Tears welled in her eyes, and her shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "I was trying to help him." "Help him?" Blake's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "By poisoning him? By making him scream in pain night after night? How exactly is that helping?" "You don't understand," Meredith said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "The doctors weren't taking his condition seriously. They kept saying it was just colic, that he would grow out of it. But I knew something was wrong with him. Something they were missing." Blake stared at her in disbelief. "So you made him sicker to get their attention?" "I needed them to do more tests," Meredith insisted, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "I've seen it before in my nursing career. Children with mysterious symptoms that get dismissed until they're too sick to ignore. I was trying to protect him." The explanation was so twisted, so fundamentally wrong, that Blake could only shake his head. That's not protection, Meredith, that's abuse. No. Meredith's voice rose sharply. Then she glanced at the sleeping baby and lowered it again. No, it's not. It's what a mother does. She advocates for her child when no one else will. You're not his mother, Blake said, the words cutting through the room like a blade. And what you've done isn't advocacy. It's something much darker. Meredith's expression hardened. I've been more of a mother to him than Sarah ever was. She abandoned him. I stepped up. Everything I've done has been for Ethan. For Ethan, or for yourself? Blake asked, a terrible clarity beginning to dawn. This was never about getting him medical attention. This was about making yourself indispensable, wasn't it? About creating a situation where I would depend on you completely. Meredith's silence was confirmation enough. Blake continued, the pieces falling into place with sickening logic. You deliberately made him sick, then positioned yourself as the only one who could comfort him. You undermined my confidence as a father. You isolated us from friends and family by making it impossible to go anywhere with a constantly screaming infant. You even used his condition to control what I did, cancelling meetings, limiting my work hours, keeping me exhausted and off balance. He took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a whisper. What kind of person does that, Meredith? What kind of person systematically tortures an innocent baby to manipulate his father? Meredith's tears had stopped, replaced by a cold calculation that Blake had never seen before. You're making me sound like a monster. I love Ethan. I love you. Everything I did was for our family. This isn't love, Blake said. I don't know what it is, but it isn't love. A knock at the front door echoed through the house. Dr. Anderson had arrived. Blake moved toward the nursery door, never taking his eyes off Meredith. That's James. He's going to examine Ethan and document everything. Then we're going to decide what happens next. Panic flashed across Meredith's face. Blake, please, let's talk about this privately. There's no need to involve James or anyone else. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I can make it right. We can fix this together. There's nothing to fix, Blake said flatly. It's over. As he turned to leave the nursery, Meredith grabbed his arm. You can't do this. You need me. Ethan needs me. Blake gently but firmly removed her hand. What Ethan needs is to be safe. And right now that means away from you. Downstairs, Blake let Dr. Anderson in, briefly explaining what he had discovered. The pediatrician's face registered shock, then professional concern. I want to examine Ethan immediately, he said, and we need to document everything. If what you're saying is true, Blake, this is a serious case of child abuse. I know, Blake said, his voice breaking slightly. I trusted her with my son, James. I let this happen right under my nose. Dr. Anderson placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. This isn't your fault. People like this, they're experts at deception. They know exactly how to manipulate those around them. Now, where is she? Upstairs with Ethan. I don't want to leave them alone. The two men hurried up the stairs to find Meredith standing over Ethan's crib, one hand reaching toward the sleeping baby. She withdrew it quickly when they entered, turning to face them with a composed expression. Dr. Anderson, she said coolly, I wasn't expecting you today. Mrs. Harrison, the doctor replied with equal formality. I need to examine Ethan. Blake has shared some concerning information with me. Of course. Meredith stepped aside, her demeanor suddenly cooperative. He's been doing much better today, actually. Blake made his last bottle and he's sleeping well. The implication was clear. She was establishing that Blake had been in charge of the most recent feeding, setting up a potential defense that any adverse findings could be his doing. Blake exchanged a glance with Dr. Anderson, who gave a slight nod of understanding. Mrs. Harrison, I think it would be best if you waited downstairs while I examine Ethan, Dr. Anderson said firmly. Blake will assist me. For a moment, it seemed Meredith might refuse, but then she nodded stiffly. Of course. I'll be in the living room if you need me. Once she had left, Dr. Anderson turned to Blake. I've already contacted Child Protective Services. They're sending someone along with a police officer. This is a case of suspected intentional harm to a child, Blake. It has to be handled by the authorities. Blake nodded, his throat tight. I know. I just can't believe this is happening. I thought I knew her. People with these psychological issues are very good at presenting a false front, Doctor. Anderson said gently as he began to examine the still sleeping Ethan. They can seem completely normal, charming even, while harboring deeply disturbed motivations. What kind of psychological issues are we talking about? Blake asked, watching as his friend carefully checked Ethan's vital signs. Based on what you've described, it sounds like a condition called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It's a form of abuse where a caregiver, usually a mother or mother figure, fabricates or induces illness in a person under their care. Dr. Anderson gently lifted Ethan's eyelids, checking his pupils. The motivation is typically to gain attention, sympathy, or a sense of control and importance. The caregiver presents themselves as the perfect, devoted parent, while simultaneously causing the child suffering. But she's not even his biological mother, Blake said. She's only been in his life for a few months. That actually fits the pattern in some cases, Dr. Anderson replied. Sometimes these individuals seek out vulnerable families, single parents, children with pre-existing conditions, or situations where they can step in as a savior. It gives them an instant role and identity. As Dr. Anderson continued his examination, Blake found himself replaying every moment of his whirlwind relationship with Meredith. They had met at a charity fundraiser for Seattle Children's Hospital, where she had claimed to work as a pediatric nurse. She had been sympathetic about his situation, a newly single father struggling to balance his company and his infant son. Their courtship had been brief and intense, with Meredith quickly assuming a central role in Ethan's care. "James," Blake said suddenly, "we need to verify her background. She told me she was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, but what if that's not true either?" Dr. Anderson looked up, his expression grave. "I know most of the pediatric nursing staff at Children's, and I don't recall anyone named Meredith Crawford. But we can check easily enough." Blake pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his head of security at Quantum Innovations. "Jake, I need an immediate background check on Meredith Crawford, now Meredith Harrison. Focus on employment history, specifically Seattle Children's Hospital." He paused, listening. "Yes, it's urgent. Call me as soon as you have anything." As he ended the call, Dr. Anderson had finished his initial examination of Ethan. His vital signs are stable, and he appears to be resting comfortably now, but I'm concerned about potential long-term effects of whatever substance was administered to him. We should take him to the hospital for a full workup and observation. "Is he in immediate danger?" Blake asked, fear clutching at his heart. "Not immediately, no. His system appears to be clearing the substance now that he's receiving clean formula, but we need to rule out any lasting damage." Blake nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let me handle Meredith first. Then we'll take him in." Downstairs, they found Meredith sitting composed in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if this were just another ordinary day. She looked up as they entered, her expression a perfect mask of concerned innocence. "How is he?" she asked, putting her phone down. "Stable for now," Dr. Anderson replied before Blake could speak. "But I'm recommending immediate hospitalization for observation and further testing." "Hospitalization?" Meredith's alarm seemed genuine. "Is that really necessary?" He was just starting to improve. "Yes, it's necessary," Blake said coldly. "And the police are on their way, Meredith, along with Child Protective Services." The color drained from her face. "The police? Blake, this is insane. We can work this out privately. There's no need to involve authorities." "There's every need," Blake countered. "You've been systematically poisoning an infant, my son." "That's not something we work out privately." Meredith stood up, her composure cracking. "You can't prove anything. It would be your word against mine. Do you really want to put Ethan through a public spectacle? Think about your company, your reputation. Once this gets out—" "Are you threatening me?" Blake asked incredulously. "After what you've done to my son, you're worried about my reputation. I'm trying to protect our family," Meredith insisted, her voice rising. "Can't you see that? Everything I've done has been for us." "There is no us anymore," Blake said firmly. "And there never really was there? It was all a manipulation from the beginning." Before Meredith could respond, Blake's phone rang. It was Jake with the background check results. "Blake, there's no record of a Meredith Crawford ever working at Seattle Children's Hospital," Jake reported. "In fact, there's no nursing license registered to anyone by that name in the state of Washington. And it gets worse. The social security number she provided on your marriage certificate belongs to a woman who died 15 years ago in Nebraska." Blake felt the floor shift beneath him. "What about her previous address?" "The references she gave me, all fabricated," Jake confirmed. "The apartment she claimed to live in before moving in with you has been occupied by an elderly couple for the past decade. Her references check out on paper, but when we called them, the numbers were disconnected. Blake, whoever this woman is, she's created an entirely fictional identity." As Blake listened, he watched Meredith's face. She must have realized from his expression that her deception was unraveling completely. Something shifted in her eyes, a coldness, a calculation that sent a chill down his spine. "Thank you, Jake," Blake said, ending the call. He turned to Meredith, who had visibly tensed. "You never worked at Seattle Children's. You're not even a nurse, are you? Who are you, really?" For a long moment, Meredith said nothing. Then a small, unsettling smile crept across her face. "You'll never know," she said softly, "and that will haunt you for the rest of your life." The sound of car doors slamming outside broke the tense silence. Through the front windows, Blake could see a police cruiser and an unmarked sedan in the driveway. Child Protective Services had arrived, along with law enforcement. Meredith's eyes darted to the windows, then back to Blake. The composed mask she had worn for months had completely fallen away, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I'm starting to understand exactly who I'm dealing with," Blake replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "And so will the authorities." Mrs. Chen appeared at the doorway, her usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. "Mr. Harrison, there are police officers and a woman from Child Services at the door." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Please show them in." Blake turned to Dr. Anderson. "James, would you mind going upstairs to be with Ethan? I don't want him left alone, and I need to speak with the officers." Dr. Anderson nodded, casting a wary glance at Meredith before heading upstairs. Blake watched as Meredith straightened her posture and smoothed her expression, the transformation so seamless it was almost impressive. In seconds, she had gone from threatening to the picture of concerned confusion. Two police officers entered the living room, followed by a serious-looking woman in a tailored suit who introduced herself as Diane Winters from Child Protective Services. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, Ms." Winters began. "We're here regarding a report of suspected child endangerment involving your son, Ethan Harrison." "This is a misunderstanding," Meredith said immediately, her voice trembling with what appeared to be emotion. "My husband has been under tremendous stress lately, with the baby's health issues and his company demands. I think he's having some kind of breakdown." Blake watched in astonishment as tears filled her eyes on command. The performance was flawless. "Officers," Blake said calmly, "I discovered today that my wife has been systematically adding a harmful chemical to my son's formula, causing him severe distress over a period of months. I have photographic evidence of the substance, which has been analyzed by a laboratory and confirmed to be a synthetic stimulant that causes gastric distress and neurological irritation in mammals." He produced his phone, showing them the photos of the bottle. "Additionally, the gardener's daughter witnessed her adding this substance to Ethan's bottle this morning." The female officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, took the phone and examined the photos carefully before passing it to her partner. "Mrs. Harrison," Officer Martinez said, "do you have any explanation for this?" Meredith's tearful expression hardened slightly before she regained control. "Those photos could be of anything. Blake is trying to frame me because he wants a divorce but doesn't want to pay alimony. Ask him about his company's financial troubles. Ask him about the affair he's been having with his executive assistant." Blake stared at her, genuinely stunned by the bold fabrications. "That's completely false. Quantum Innovations is financially sound, as our public records show, and I've never been unfaithful." "Mrs. Harrison," Ms. Winters interjected, "we have a report from Dr. James Anderson, who has been Ethan's pediatrician since birth. He documents a pattern of symptoms consistent with the effects of the substance Mr. Harrison described, as well as the immediate improvement in Ethan's condition when Mr. Harrison began preparing the formula himself." Meredith's strategy shifted visibly. "Yes, I added a supplement to his formula, but it was a natural probiotic recommended by a holistic doctor. Blake is blowing this out of proportion because he doesn't understand alternative medicine. The bottle might look scary because it's a concentrated form, but it's completely harmless." "We have the laboratory analysis," Blake countered, producing the report from his pocket. "This is not a probiotic or any kind of supplement. It's a laboratory-grade stimulant specifically designed to cause distress." Officer Martinez took the report, reading it carefully before showing it to Ms. Winters. The CPS worker's expression grew more concerned as she reviewed the findings. "Mrs. Harrison, this substance is clearly harmful, especially to an infant," Ms. Winters said. "We need to take Ethan to the hospital immediately for evaluation, and we'll need to investigate this situation further. You can't take my baby, Meredith said, her voice suddenly hard. I am his mother. Actually, Blake said quietly, you're not. Not legally, not biologically. You're his stepmother, and you've been harming him deliberately. Also, we've just discovered that your entire identity appears to be fraudulent. You never worked at Seattle Children's Hospital as you claimed, and you're using a social security number belonging to a deceased person. The male officer, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up sharply. Is that true, ma'am? Meredith's eyes darted between the officers, Blake and Ms. Winters. For a moment, Blake thought she might try to run, but instead she straightened her shoulders and adopted a look of dignified injury. I changed my name years ago to escape an abusive relationship, she said. It was the only way to protect myself. I've been living under this identity for so long that it became real to me. Yes, I used someone else's social security number, but it was out of desperation. As for my employment history, I exaggerated my credentials to impress Blake. I did work in healthcare, just not at Seattle Children's. The explanation was delivered with such conviction that Blake almost found himself wondering if it could be true. Almost. We can verify your identity at the station, Officer Martinez said. For now, our primary concern is the child's welfare. I want her arrested, Blake said firmly. She's been systematically poisoning my son. Blake, please. Meredith reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I made mistakes, I admit that, but I love Ethan, I love you, we can work through this. Before Blake could respond, Dr. Anderson appeared at the doorway holding Ethan, who was now awake and calm in his arms. The baby's doing well at the moment, but I strongly recommend immediate medical evaluation at the hospital. Ms. Winters nodded. I'll accompany you and Ethan to the hospital, Mr. Harrison. The officers will need to speak with Mrs. Harrison separately. I'm coming too, Meredith insisted, moving toward Dr. Anderson and Ethan. He needs his mother. Stay back, Blake warned, stepping between her and his son. You're not going anywhere near him again. Officer Martinez placed a gentle but firm hand on Meredith's arm. Mrs. Harrison, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about this situation. For a brief moment, something dangerous flashed in Meredith's eyes, a cold fury that made Blake instinctively move closer to Dr. Anderson and Ethan. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a tearful resignation. I understand, she said softly. Blake, please, when you've calmed down, you'll see that this is all a terrible misunderstanding. As the officers led Meredith away, Blake felt a profound relief tinged with sorrow. The woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with his son's life, had never really existed. She had been a carefully constructed facade hiding something much darker. At the hospital, Ethan underwent a battery of tests. Blood work confirmed traces of the synthetic stimulant in his system, though the levels were already decreasing since Blake had taken over his feeding. The pediatric gastroenterologist who examined him was cautiously optimistic. Babies are remarkably resilient, she told Blake as they stood beside Ethan's hospital crib. With the substance eliminated from his diet, his digestive system should return to normal functioning within days. The concern is any potential neurological impact from prolonged exposure. We'll need to monitor his development closely over the coming months. Blake nodded, watching as Ethan slept peacefully. Will there be permanent damage? It's too early to say definitively, the doctor replied honestly, but the fact that he's already showing improvement is a very positive sign. Children his age have incredible neuroplasticity. Their brains can adapt and recover in ways adult brains cannot. Ms. Winters from CPS returned with an update late that evening. Mrs. Harrison has been detained for questioning, she informed Blake. The police are investigating her background, and they've already found some concerning information. It appears she may have done this before. Blake looked up sharply. What do you mean? Ms. Winters hesitated, then spoke carefully. This is preliminary, but they've linked her fingerprints to another identity, a woman named Patricia Lawson, who was briefly married to a wealthy widower in Portland 3 years ago. His infant daughter experienced mysterious health problems that resolved when the marriage ended abruptly. The case was never fully investigated because the father was reluctant to pursue it after she left. The implication was clear. Meredith, or Patricia, or whatever her real name was, had a pattern of targeting vulnerable families with young children. The thought made Blake physically ill. There's something else, Ms. Winters continued. When the police searched your home, they found evidence that Mrs. Harrison has been siphoning money from your accounts, significant amounts, transferred to offshore accounts under yet another name. Blake ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and shock washing over him in waves. I didn't even check the accounts. She offered to take over the household finances when we got married, and I was so overwhelmed with Ethan and the company that I gladly let her. Mr. Harrison, don't blame yourself, Ms. Winters said gently. People like this. They're predators. They identify vulnerabilities and exploit them. You're not the first person to be deceived, and unfortunately you probably won't be the last. But Ethan paid the price, Blake said, his voice breaking. My son suffered because I was too blind to see what was happening right in front of me. You did see it, Ms. Winters reminded him. Maybe not immediately, but you noticed when something wasn't right. You investigated. You protected your son. That's what matters now. As Ms. Winters left, promising to return in the morning with more information, Blake sat beside Ethan's hospital crib, watching his son's peaceful sleep. For the first time in months, Ethan wasn't crying in pain or distress. The contrast was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Jake, his security chief. Found more, M. Has used at least 5 different identities in last 10 years. Pattern of targeting wealthy single fathers. Call me when you can. 5 different identities. 5 families potentially harmed. 5 children like Ethan, suffering while their fathers remained oblivious to the cause. The scope of the deception was staggering. A soft knock at the door drew Blake's attention. He looked up to see Rosa Mendez standing hesitantly in the doorway, her daughter Lily partially hidden behind her. Mr. Harrison, the nurse said we could come in for a moment. Rosa's eyes moved to Ethan, relief washing over her face when she saw him sleeping peacefully. How is he? Much better, Blake said, managing a small smile. The doctors say he should recover completely with time. Rosa stepped into the room, guiding Lily forward gently. Lily has been very worried. She wanted to make sure the baby was okay. Lily approached the crib cautiously, peering at Ethan with solemn eyes. He's not crying anymore, she observed quietly. No, he's not, Blake agreed. And that's because of you, Lily. You saved him. If you hadn't seen what was happening and had the courage to tell me, he might have been hurt much worse. Lily's serious expression gave way to a small, proud smile. I just did what my mum always tells me to do. If you see something wrong, you have to tell someone who can help. Blake glanced at Rosa, who was watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness. You've raised an incredible daughter, Mrs. Mendez. She has more courage and integrity than most adults I know. Thank you, Rosa said softly. But please call me Rosa. I think after everything that's happened, we can dispense with formalities. Blake nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Rosa, I don't even know how to begin thanking you and Lily. If there's ever anything I can do for you both, Rosa shook her head. You don't need to thank us. We did what anyone should do. But if you don't mind, I have brought something for the baby. She produced a small stuffed bear from her bag. It's not new, it was Lily's when she was little, but she wanted him to have it. Lily took the bear from her mother and placed it carefully beside Ethan in the crib. His name is Valiente, she explained seriously. It means brave in Spanish. I thought he might need a brave friend. Blake felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's very kind, Lily. I'm sure Ethan will love him. As Rosa and Lily prepared to leave, promising to visit again soon, Blake was struck by the contrast between the genuine kindness of this mother and daughter and the calculated manipulation of the woman he had married. One had acted out of pure concern for a child she barely knew. The other had systematically harmed a baby in her care for her own twisted purposes. The revelation was as painful as it was clarifying. Blake had been seeking a partner, a co-parent to help him raise his son after Sarah's abandonment. Instead, he had invited a predator into their lives, someone who saw them not as people to love, but as targets to exploit. As night fell over Seattle, Blake remained at Ethan's side, the stuffed bear Valiente keeping watch alongside him. Outside the hospital windows, rain began to fall again, washing the city clean. Blake felt a similar cleansing happening within him, a painful but necessary purging of illusions, a clearing of vision that had been clouded for too long. Tomorrow would bring more investigations, more revelations, more steps toward understanding the full extent of Meredith's deception. There would be legal proceedings, financial untangling, and the long process of rebuilding their lives. But for tonight, Blake was content to watch his son sleep peacefully, free from pain at last. 3 weeks after Meredith's arrest, Blake sat in his attorney's office, staring at the stack of documents that detailed the full extent of her deception. The woman he had known as Meredith Crawford, and then Meredith Harrison, had been born Karen Elizabeth Dunham in a small town in Minnesota. She had left home at 18, and from there, her path had become a twisted labyrinth of assumed identities and calculated predation. "We've confirmed at least 7 different identities over the past 12 years, Victoria Chen, Blake's attorney, explained, as she spread photographs across her desk. Each showed the same woman, Meredith, but with different hair colors, styles, and names. Patricia Lawson in Portland, Jennifer Miles in San Francisco, Rebecca Wilson in Chicago, and so on. And in each case, she targeted single fathers with money," Blake said, the pattern now painfully clear. Victoria nodded. "Specifically, single fathers with very young children, usually under a year old. She would establish herself as indispensable, usually by creating or exacerbating health problems in the child, then marry the father quickly." "How did no one catch her?" Blake asked, picking up a photo of Jennifer Miles with her arm around a man holding a baby. The image was eerily similar to ones in his own wedding album. She never stayed in one place long enough. Once she had secured what she wanted, usually substantial sums of money, she would disappear before suspicions solidified. In most cases, the fathers were either too embarrassed to pursue legal action or simply relieved that their children's mysterious ailment suddenly improved after her departure. Blake set the photo down, sickened by the thought of other children suffering as Ethan had. "And now?" "She's facing multiple felony charges," Victoria said. "Child endangerment, identity theft, fraud. The prosecutor is building a case that spans multiple states. With the evidence from your home and the laboratory analysis of the substance she was using, they have a strong case. She's looking at significant prison time." Blake nodded, relief mingling with lingering disbelief. How had he, a man who prided himself on his judgment and business acumen, been so thoroughly deceived? "The divorce proceedings are underway," Victoria continued, sensing his thoughts. "Given the circumstances, the court has granted an emergency annulment based on fraud. As for the financial aspects, my team is working with forensic accountants to trace and recover the funds she diverted from your accounts." "And Ethan?" Blake asked, though he already knew the answer. Over the past 3 weeks, his son had transformed. The constant crying and distress had given way to peaceful sleep, healthy appetite, and the beginnings of a happy, curious personality that Blake had glimpsed only rarely before. "The courts have granted you sole legal and physical custody, of course," Victoria confirmed, "and the medical reports from Dr. Anderson and the hospital specialists indicate that Ethan should make a complete recovery with no lasting effects from the stimulant." Blake let out a long breath, gratitude washing over him. That had been his greatest fear, that his son would suffer permanent damage from Meredith's actions. The pediatric neurologist had explained that while exposure to the chemical had been concerning, Ethan's young brain was remarkably adaptable. Already his sleep patterns had normalized, his digestive system had settled, and he was meeting all developmental milestones appropriate for his age. "There's one more thing," Victoria said, pulling out a final document. "The judge granted your request for a restraining order. She won't be able to come within 1,000 feet of you or Ethan, even if she's eventually released." "Thank you," Blake said, signing the document, "for everything. I know this hasn't been a typical case." Victoria offered a sympathetic smile. "Unfortunately, cases like this aren't as rare as we'd like to think. People who prey on emotional vulnerability can be extraordinarily sophisticated in their methods. They identify needs and present themselves as the perfect solution." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Blake, I hope you know that none of this was your fault." Blake wasn't ready to accept that absolution, not yet. He had been careless with his son's safety, blinded by his own need for support and companionship after Sarah's departure. That was a hard truth he would have to live with. Later that afternoon, Blake sat in the sunroom of his lakeside home, watching as Lily Mendez entertained Ethan on a colorful playmat. The contrast between his son now and just a month ago was striking. Ethan laughed, a full-bodied baby chuckle that filled the room with joy, as Lily made his stuffed bear Valiente dance above him. Rosa Mendez entered with a tray of lemonade, setting it down on the table beside Blake. "He's getting stronger every day," she observed, smiling at the scene. "Thanks to your daughter," Blake said. He had said it many times over the past weeks, but the gratitude never diminished. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay what she did for us. Rosa sat in the chair opposite him, her weathered hands folding in her lap. Mr. Harrison, Blake, Lily did what any decent person should do. She saw something wrong and spoke up. It's simple, but most people wouldn't have noticed, or if they did, they might have stayed silent. A child especially. Blake shook his head in wonder. She saw what I couldn't see, even though it was happening right in front of me. Children often see more clearly than adults, Rosa said thoughtfully. They haven't learned to doubt their instincts or make excuses for bad behavior. When Lily's father left us, she was only 4, but she understood immediately that he wasn't coming back. I kept making excuses. He's working, he's visiting family, but she knew the truth before I could accept it. Blake nodded, understanding the parallel. He had made countless excuses for Ethan's suffering and Meredith's behavior, creating elaborate justifications rather than facing the simple, terrible truth. Rosa, he said after a moment, I have a proposition for you. I know you're currently renting an apartment in South Seattle, and the commute here must be difficult. Rosa looked at him cautiously. It's not so bad. The bus is reliable most days. There's a guest house on the property, Blake continued. It's fully furnished, about 200 square feet. It has 2 bedrooms, its own kitchen, everything. It's been sitting empty since I bought the place. He gestured toward the large windows, where the small cottage was visible near the edge of the gardens. I'd like to offer it to you and Lily, rent-free. You'd be doing me a favor, actually, having someone trustworthy on the property. Rosa's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. Mr. Harrison, that's extremely generous, but I couldn't accept such charity. It's not charity, Blake insisted. I need a full-time property manager, someone who understands the grounds and can oversee the landscaping team. The position comes with housing. It would be a promotion from your current role, with appropriate compensation, of course. And it has nothing to do with Lily helping Ethan? Rosa asked, her direct gaze challenging him. Blake smiled slightly. I won't pretend that I'm not grateful for what Lily did, but this is a business decision too. You're excellent at what you do, Rosa. The gardens have never looked better, and I trust you. After what happened with Meredith, trust isn't something I extend easily these days. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter play with Ethan. The apartment is small, she admitted finally. Lily shares a room with my sister, and the neighborhood isn't the safest. The schools aren't good either. The local school here is one of the best in the state, Blake said, knowing he was gaining ground. And Lily would have her own room, a safe place to play outside. I'd still want to pay something, Rosa insisted. Not for the housing, if it's part of the job, but utilities at least. We can work out the details, Blake agreed, respecting her pride. Just think about it. As they spoke, Lily had managed to get Ethan to grab for the bear, his tiny fingers closing around the stuffed animal's ear. Her delight at this small achievement was evident in her wide smile and encouraging words. She's good with him, Blake observed. Rosa nodded, a hint of sadness crossing her features. She always wanted a little brother or sister. Before my husband left, we had planned for more children. Blake hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. Rosa, would you and Lily consider another arrangement as well? Ethan needs childcare while I'm at work. I've been interviewing nannies, but after everything that's happened, I'm finding it difficult to trust strangers with him. Lily clearly has a special connection with Ethan, and you're one of the few people I trust completely. Rosa looked surprised. You want us to watch Ethan? But I'm not trained in childcare, and Lily is just a child herself. You raised an amazing daughter, Blake pointed out. That's all the qualification I need. And Lily wouldn't be responsible for him. She'd just be there as a friend, a big sister figure. I'd pay for any training you want, of course, and if you're not comfortable with it, I completely understand. Before Rosa could respond, Lily called out excitedly, Mum, Mum, look! He's trying to roll over. Both adults turned to see Ethan on his stomach, pushing up with his arms and rocking from side to side in an early attempt to roll onto his back. Blake moved quickly to the playmat, kneeling beside his son. That's it, buddy, he encouraged, gently supporting Ethan's efforts. You've got it. With a determined wiggle, Ethan managed to flip onto his back, his face registering momentary surprise before breaking into a gummy smile. Blake felt a surge of pride and joy that brought unexpected tears to his eyes. This simple milestone, this normal moment of baby development, felt like a miracle after months of watching his son struggle in pain. He's getting so strong, Lily said approvingly, placing Valiente on Ethan's chest. And he's not crying anymore. No, he's not, Blake agreed, gently stroking his son's cheek. Thanks to you, Lily. Rosa watched the interaction, her expression softening. We'll consider your offer, Blake, both offers. But if we accept, it would be as employees and neighbors, not as charity cases. Is that understood? Blake nodded, respecting her dignity. Completely understood. As the afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the sunroom floor, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that had sustained him through Ethan's months of suffering, but a calm, steady belief that things were finally moving in the right direction. Ethan gurgled happily, reaching for Lily's long braid with curious fingers. Lily giggled, moving her hair just out of reach, then back within grasp, turning it into a game that delighted the baby. Their laughter mingled in the warm air, a sound that seemed to cleanse the house of its darker memories. Later that evening, after Rosa and Lily had left with a promise to consider his offers, Blake sat in the nursery, watching Ethan sleep peacefully in his crib. The stuffed bear Valiente stood guard from the corner, a silent protector. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Judge denied bail again. She's staying in custody until trial. Thought you'd want to know. Relief washed over him. Meredith, or Karen, or whatever her real name was, would remain behind bars, unable to harm Ethan or any other child for the foreseeable future. The legal system was working as it should, providing the protection that Blake had failed to ensure himself. As he typed a quick "thank you" in response, Blake found himself reflecting on the strange, twisted path that had led to this moment. He had been searching for a partner, for someone to help him navigate the challenges of single parenthood. Instead, he had invited danger into his home, placing his son at risk through his own poor judgment. And yet, that same terrible mistake had ultimately led to this moment of peace. If he hadn't married Meredith, he might never have come to know Rosa and Lily Mendez beyond their professional relationship. He might never have witnessed the simple, powerful courage of an 8-year-old girl who saw wrong and spoke truth, regardless of the consequences. Perhaps most importantly, he might never have learned this essential lesson in discernment, in looking beyond surface appearances to the deeper truths beneath. It was a lesson he would carry forward, not just in his personal relationships, but in his role as Ethan's father. He would teach his son to value substance over appearance, to trust actions over words, to recognize genuine care amid a world of manipulation. As Blake stood to leave the nursery, he paused at the doorway, looking back at his sleeping son. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, the promise as much to himself as to Ethan. "We're going to be more than okay." Outside, the Seattle night was clear for once, stars visible above the lake in rare display. Blake stood at the window of his home office, gazing out at the pinpoints of light reflected in the dark water. Each star seemed to represent a piece of truth, a fragment of clarity, in what had been a landscape of deception. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Rosa. "We've discussed your offers. Lily is very excited about the possibility of being closer to Ethan. If you're still interested, we'd like to accept. We can discuss details tomorrow." Blake smiled, typing a quick response. "Wonderful news. Looking forward to working out the arrangements." "Thank you, Rosa." As he set the phone down, Blake felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The path forward was becoming clear. Not the path he had originally envisioned, but perhaps one that was truer, stronger, and ultimately better for both him and Ethan. From the nursery, he heard Ethan stir briefly before settling back to sleep. No screams, no cries of pain, just the normal sounds of a healthy baby dreaming. It was the most beautiful sound Blake had ever heard, a harmony of healing that promised better days ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new steps toward rebuilding their lives. But for tonight, this moment of peace was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 1 year later, the Harrison estate had transformed. What had once been a showcase of wealth and privilege had become something much more valuable, a home. The formal gardens still flourished under Rosa's expert care, but now they were interspersed with practical additions, a vegetable patch near the kitchen, a butterfly garden that doubled as an outdoor classroom, and a secure play area where Ethan, now 18 months old, could explore safely. The guest house, once an afterthought on the property, had become a warm, welcoming space that reflected Rosa and Lily's personalities. Colorful curtains hung in the windows, and potted plants lined the small porch. A handmade sign, painted by Lily herself, proclaimed it Casa Mendez in bright blue letters. Blake stood on the back terrace, watching as Lily helped Ethan navigate the small slide they had installed near the koi pond. At almost 10 now, Lily had taken her role as Ethan's unofficial big sister seriously, developing a patience and gentleness with him that belied her age. "Higher, Ethan! Reach higher," she encouraged, as the toddler attempted to climb the 3 small steps to the slide platform. Ethan, determined and focused, grabbed the railing with chubby hands and pulled himself up another step. His progress over the past year had been remarkable. Once free from the effects of the chemical Meredith had been administering, he had thrived, quickly catching up on missed developmental milestones and blossoming into a curious, cheerful child with Blake's serious eyes and thoughtful demeanor. "He's getting more coordinated every day," Rosa observed, joining Blake on the terrace with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him before taking a seat at the outdoor table. "Dr. Anderson will be impressed at his checkup next week." Blake nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "James says he's completely on track now, maybe even a bit advanced in his language development. All those books you and Lily read to him must be paying off." Rosa smiled, watching as Ethan finally reached the top of the slide and sat down, looking to Lily for approval before pushing off. "Lily takes her reading duties very seriously. She's practicing her Spanish with him too. Yesterday I heard her teaching him to count to 5. I noticed. He was saying tres all evening." Blake chuckled, remembering Ethan's determined repetition of the new word. "It's good for him to be bilingual. Sarah would have wanted that." The mention of Ethan's biological mother no longer carried the sting it once had. In the months following Meredith's arrest, Blake had reconnected with Sarah, sharing the full story of what had happened in her absence. Though their romantic relationship was firmly in the past, they had established a new connection based on their shared concern for Ethan. Sarah, still working overseas, made regular video calls and sent packages from her travels. She had visited twice, forming a cautious relationship with her son that Blake hoped would grow stronger with time. "Have you heard anything more about the trial?" Rosa asked, her voice lowering slightly though the children were well out of earshot. Blake sighed, setting his coffee down. "It's finally over. The sentencing was yesterday. 15 years, with possibility of parole after 10. The judge took into account the multiple instances across state lines, the premeditation, and of course the harm to the children." Rosa made the sign of the cross, a habit from her Catholic upbringing. "Dios mío, will she really serve that long?" "Victoria thinks so. The evidence was overwhelming once they connected all the cases." Blake shook his head, still unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of Meredith's deception. They found 7 families altogether, spanning 12 years. 7 children who suffered needlessly. "And now 7 families who can heal," Rosa pointed out gently. "Thanks to Lily and you, they all know the truth now." "That's no small thing," Blake nodded, watching as Ethan slid down into Lily's waiting arms, his laughter carrying across the garden. "The foundation is helping them, providing medical follow-up, therapy, whatever they need." The Harrison Foundation for Child Safety had been Blake's response to the trauma his family had endured. Using a significant portion of his personal fortune, he had established an organization dedicated to protecting children from all forms of abuse, with special emphasis on education about Munchausen syndrome by proxy and similar forms of medical child abuse. In its first year, the foundation had already helped dozens of families and funded research into better detection and prevention methods. "The symposium next month is almost fully booked," Blake continued, referring to the Foundation's upcoming conference for medical professionals, social workers, and law enforcement. "We've got experts coming from all over the country. James is presenting his protocol for identifying suspicious symptom patterns. And Lily is very excited about her role," Rosa added with a proud smile. "She's been practicing her speech every night." Blake smiled at the thought. Lily was scheduled to give a brief talk about the importance of listening to children who report concerning behavior. At her age, most kids would be terrified by the prospect of addressing a room full of professionals, but Lily had embraced the opportunity with characteristic determination. "She's going to be amazing," Blake said confidently. "Her perspective is so valuable. Most of these professionals have never heard directly from a child who recognized and reported abuse." A squeal of delight drew their attention back to the play area, where Ethan had successfully climbed the slide steps on his own and was preparing for another descent. Lily stood at the bottom, arms outstretched, her face a picture of encouraging pride. "One thing I've been meaning to ask you," Blake said, turning back to Rosa. "The school called yesterday about Lily's science project. They were quite impressed and mentioned something about a special program for gifted students." Rosa nodded, a mixture of pride and concern crossing her features. "Yes, they want her to join an advanced placement track starting next year. It would mean extra classes, different teachers, potentially a different school eventually." "But that's wonderful," Blake said, noting her hesitation. "Lily is incredibly bright. She should have every opportunity to develop her potential." "It is wonderful," Rosa agreed. "But the program they recommended is across the city. The commute would be difficult, and the materials, the special projects, it all costs money." Blake considered this. "You know, I'd be happy to help with any educational expenses for Lily, after what she did for Ethan, for all of us." "Blake," Rosa interrupted gently but firmly, "we've talked about this. Lily didn't help Ethan to get rewards or advantages. She did it because it was right. I don't want her to learn that good deeds should come with expectations of payment." Blake respected Rosa's principled stance, even as he wished she would allow him to do more for Lily. Over the past year, he had come to care deeply for both Rosa and her daughter, viewing them not just as employees, but as an extended family of sorts. Ethan adored them, and Blake had found in Rosa a friend and confidant whose wisdom and grounded perspective had helped him navigate the aftermath of Meredith's betrayal. "What if it's not a reward, but an investment?" Blake suggested carefully. "The foundation could establish a scholarship program for children who demonstrate exceptional promise in sciences or healthcare. Lily would be a natural first recipient, but it wouldn't be just for her." Rosa considered this, watching her daughter with thoughtful eyes. "A scholarship program could help many children, not just Lily." "Exactly," Blake agreed, seeing that she was warming to the idea. "We're always talking about preventing abuse and protecting children, but part of that mission should be nurturing the next generation of professionals who will carry that work forward. Children like Lily, who have the intelligence and moral courage to make a real difference." After a moment, Rosa nodded slowly. "I could support something like that. As long as Lily understands she'd need to maintain certain academic standards and give back in some way, perhaps mentoring younger students eventually." "Of course," Blake said, relieved that they had found a compromise. "I'll have Victoria draft a proposal for the foundation board. We could announce it at the symposium next month." As they finalized the details, Ethan toddled up the terrace steps, Lily close behind him. His face was flushed with exertion and happiness, his dark hair curling damply at his temples. "Dada!" he called, making a beeline for Blake. "Slide!" "Big slide!" Blake scooped him up, breathing in the sweet scent of his son, sunshine, baby shampoo, and the indefinable essence that was uniquely Ethan. "You did the big slide? All by yourself?" "He did it 3 times, Lily reported proudly, accepting a glass of lemonade from her mother. "And he climbed the steps without help on the last one." "That's my brave boy," Blake said, settling Ethan on his lap. The toddler immediately reached for Blake's coffee cup, requiring a quick diversion to a more appropriate sippy cup of water that Rosa produced from a small cooler. As Ethan drank thirstily, Blake caught Lily watching him with a thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind, Lily?" She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't seen Mrs. Harrison that day? In the greenhouse?" The question caught Blake off guard. It was something he had contemplated many times, usually in the dark hours of early morning, when doubts and fears were hardest to keep at bay. The potential outcomes haunted him still. Ethan suffering increasing damage, perhaps permanent harm, while Blake remained blind to the cause. "I do think about it," he admitted, seeing no reason to shield Lily from the truth she had helped uncover. "And I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to tell me what you saw." Lily nodded seriously. "I was scared you wouldn't believe me. Grown-ups sometimes don't listen to kids. That's why your speech at the symposium is so important," Blake told her. "You're going to help teach those grown-ups how to listen better." "Do you think other kids will have to do what I did?" Lily asked, her voice small. "See bad things and have to tell?" Blake exchanged a glance with Rosa, who nodded encouragingly. "Unfortunately, yes," he said honestly. "There will always be children who witness things they shouldn't have to see. But because of the foundation, because of the work we're doing, more adults will know what to look for. And when children do speak up, More people will listen. Lily seemed satisfied with this answer. Good, because it was scary, but I'd do it again. For Ethan or any baby. I know you would, Blake said, feeling a swell of affection for this remarkable child. That's what makes you special, Lily. You do the right thing, even when it's hard. Ethan, having finished his water, wriggled down from Blake's lap and tugged at Lily's hand. More slide? He asked hopefully. Lily looked to her mother, who nodded permission. 10 more minutes, then lunch, Rosa said. And stay in the shade, it's getting hot. As the children returned to the play area, Blake found himself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led to this peaceful moment. A little over a year ago, his home had been a place of suffering and deception, his son a victim, and his own judgment catastrophically flawed. Now that same space was filled with laughter and genuine care, his son was thriving, and Blake himself had found a new purpose that extended far beyond his corporate success. I'm thinking of stepping back from Quantum, he said suddenly, surprising both Rosa and himself with the admission. Not completely, but enough to focus more on the foundation, and on Ethan, of course. Rosa studied him carefully. Are you sure? You've built that company from nothing. It's in good hands, Blake said, referring to the executive team he had carefully assembled over the past decade. And the truth is, what happened with Meredith, it changed my priorities. I used to think success meant building the biggest, most innovative tech company possible. Now I measure it differently. And how do you measure it now? Rosa asked, though her gentle smile suggested she already knew the answer. Blake's eyes found Ethan, who was once again climbing the slide steps with determined focus, Lily offering encouragement from behind. By the quality of the life I provide for my son, by the positive impact I can have on other children who need protection, by the community we build around us. He gestured to include Rosa in this vision. Success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you contribute. Rosa nodded approvingly, a wise perspective, and one that Lily and I are proud to share in our own small way. There's nothing small about what you and Lily contribute, Blake said firmly. You've helped create a real home here, not just a house. Ethan is thriving because of both of you. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the children play. The Seattle sun, often hidden behind clouds, shone brightly today, casting dappled shadows through the Japanese maple trees that bordered the garden. In the distance, Lake Washington glittered like scattered diamonds, boats creating white trails across its surface. Blake's phone vibrated with a notification, but for once, he didn't immediately check it. Whatever business matter required his attention could wait. This moment, watching his son play, sharing quiet conversation with a trusted friend, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, was too precious to interrupt. I've been thinking, he said after a while, about expanding the Foundation's focus, beyond just education and intervention in cases of medical child abuse. What did you have in mind? Rosa asked. Support systems for single parents, Blake replied. If I had had better resources, a stronger community around me after Sarah left, maybe I wouldn't have been so vulnerable to someone like Meredith. Maybe I would have recognized the warning signs earlier. Rosa considered this thoughtfully. Many parents are isolated, especially in cities like Seattle where families often live far from relatives. A program that connects them with support could make a real difference. Exactly. Play groups, childcare cooperatives, even just regular check-ins from trained volunteers. Blake warmed to the idea as he spoke. We could start right here in Seattle, develop a model, then help other communities implement it. You should talk to Dr. Anderson about it, Rosa suggested. He sees so many struggling parents in his practice. He would have valuable insights. Blake nodded, making a mental note to call James that evening. The pediatrician had become an even closer friend over the past year, serving as both a medical advisor to the Foundation and a personal support to Blake as he navigated the challenges of raising Ethan after trauma. From the garden came the sound of Ethan's laughter, pure and uninhibited, as Lily pretended to zoom him around like an airplane after his latest slide descent. The sound filled Blake with a joy so profound it almost hurt, a physical ache in his chest that was the opposite of pain. A year ago, he couldn't have imagined this moment. In the darkest days of Ethan's suffering, when night after sleepless night was punctuated by his son's agonized cries, Blake had sometimes wondered if they would ever know normal happiness. Now here it was, not just normal happiness but extraordinary joy, built on the foundation of truth that Lily's courage had established. As Blake rose to join the children for lunch, He felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for Lily's observant eyes and brave heart. Gratitude for Rosa's wisdom and steadfast presence. Gratitude for Ethan's resilience and capacity for joy, despite what he had endured. Most of all, Blake felt grateful for the second chance they had all been given, a chance to build something genuine and lasting from the ashes of deception. It wasn't the family he had envisioned when he had proposed to Meredith in a whirlwind of desperate hope. It was something more authentic, more firmly grounded in truth and mutual respect. As Ethan ran to him on sturdy legs, arms outstretched and face alight with trust, Blake knew with absolute certainty that this moment, these people, this life they were creating together, was what he had been searching for all along. Not a perfect facade hiding darkness beneath, but a real home where truth was valued above comfort and courage above convenience. Blake lifted his son high in the air, reveling in Ethan's squeals of delight. "Ready for lunch, buddy?" "Lunch? With Lily and Rosa?" Ethan confirmed enthusiastically. "That's right," Blake agreed, settling the toddler on his hip. "Our family lunch." Family. The word felt right. Even if it didn't match conventional definitions, they had formed their own unique constellation, Blake and Ethan at the center, with Rosa and Lily as vital, shining points in their shared sky, connected not by blood or legal documents, but by something perhaps more enduring: shared truth, mutual respect, and genuine care. As they gathered around the outdoor table, passing plates and helping Ethan with his food, Blake caught Lily's eye and smiled warmly. "Thank you," he said simply. Lily, wise beyond her years, understood exactly what he meant. She nodded solemnly, then broke into a wide grin as Ethan offered her a slightly squashed piece of his sandwich. "De nada," she replied, accepting the soggy offering with gracious dignity. "That's Spanish for you're welcome." "De nada," Ethan repeated carefully, looking to Lily for approval. As laughter circled the table, Blake felt the last shadows of the past year finally lift completely. Ahead lay a future built on truth, sometimes difficult, often messy, but always authentic. A future where small observers like Lily were heard and valued, where children like Ethan could grow up safe and loved, where the quiet courage of speaking truth outweighed the hollow comfort of convenient lies. It was, Blake realized, the most valuable lesson he could ever teach his son, that truth, even when it hurts, is the only foundation strong enough to build a life upon.